I thought I would mention a couple of my books since people have no idea what they're about. How Great Evil Birthed Great Good. A major issue today, especially with Kamala Harris, she's really pushing abortion. And this is really important. She's giving lots of stories. One area where there tends to be a lot of agreement is if a woman is raped, she is justified in having an abortion. Well, that's what this book is about. This is a book about a woman who was raped by a black man by a gun. She had a bad experience. Okay, she got pregnant. How did she deal with it? And since I wrote this, I've had several people come up and say, yeah, I know someone that this happened to, and you're probably thinking, when the child is born, is the child at fault? Obviously not. And how does it turn out? Well, I don't want to give you the whole story, but it turns out in a way that surprises a lot of people. And so, if you like to read novels, I found novels don't tend to do very well. And a lot of people said, look, I don't read novels, I don't read stories, I read true books, things that really happen. And that's the way I am. I rarely read novels. But several people said you need to get your information out in the novel form. This, A Child Changes a Life, is about a man who is gay, had a partner, lived together with a partner. Things happen, and all of a sudden, he looks at the world in a very different way. And this is A Child Changes a Life, and I'll give you one hint. When he was trying to get through law school, he didn't have much money. He had to struggle, and he found there's a sperm bank nearby. You could get, I forget, $50 a crack. And he thought, that's one way, and the law students, of course, at Stanford University are very prestigious. So when you're looking at a sperm donor, the donor was a law student at Stanford University. Those are very desirable people. And so lo and behold, here's a gay man. Lo and behold, from that sperm bank, a woman got pregnant with his child. And it's really amazing. It's a true story. And this other is a true story. My lawyers said, I can't say it's a true story. Inspired by a story. I can say that. I don't see the difference, but I'm not a lawyer, so I didn't want to get sued. So anyways, I think you might enjoy them. Again, I don't read novels, but I've had a lot of good feedback. The last place I went to in Indianapolis, I'm surprised at how many of these I sold, which is, again, unusual, because usually certain books, like my Hitler book, everywhere I go, without exception, I sell out. I can bring a whole box and I still sell out. That's a very popular topic, and so, which is fine. And I can see why. I guess if I were at one of these meetings, I would probably buy the Hitler book and not the others. But just to let you know, the others are there. Okay, the Scopes trial. Why is this? Who cares? Why is this important? Well, I'm trying to give you a few reasons why it's important. It's not only the most famous trial in American history, it's basically about evolution versus creation, or at least that's what it's purported to be. A law was passed in Dayton, Tennessee, and that basically outlawed the teachings of human evolution. The ACLU, which is very supportive of evolution, didn't like that. So the ACLU wanted a test case to see whether or not they could make that law unconstitutional. So they got a test case, went to court, and that was the Scopes trial. Okay, there's a few court cases that changed America drastically. And I'll give you one story which will help you see where I'm coming from. So many of us blame problems on Satan, which probably he's at fault. And one person I knew, and I bet you know people like this as well, it's a married couple, nice guy, but he was really critical of his wife in front of people. He called her stupid. He would call her lame brain, imbecile. How'd you graduate from 6th grade? And he did that a lot, and we just we were embarrassed. But men, you don't treat your wife that way, right? And then she finally, and they were together for 20 years, and then she finally filed for divorce, and his explanation was, Satan got a hold of her. And I thought, we kind of knew, look, don't blame it on Satan. It's your fault. You should not, the person you love, if you call him or her stupid, imbecile, etc., what are you saying about yourself? If my spouse is stupid, what does that say about me? And so therefore, over and over when I talk about this issue, people say, well, Satan's doing that. Well, that may well be, but unfortunately, a lot of the times, we are at fault for what happens. Okay, so the first, basically, how did creation become banned? The first case was Darwin proposed evolution theory. Wasn't banned yet. Scopes trial, 66 years later, the Scopes trial is where evolution was working on being banned. Then Emerson versus Board of Education, basically they said separation of church and state means that you cannot teach creation because that's religion, evolution is science, and therefore you can teach that. And the last one is court cases. About 15 years later, there are probably 24 court cases consistently in every case said you cannot teach creation or anti-evolution because that's backdoor creation. You cannot teach creation because that's unconstitutional, is what they ruled. There is John Scopes. He was actually a phys ed teacher. He actually did not teach evolution, but they had to get somebody as the case. He was he did sub for an evolution class, and so probably it was mentioned. And there's Brian, right here, and there's Clarence Darrow. And there's Brian again, and these are all the people who were, as I guess, just there at the Scopes trial case. And there is the courtroom. It was packed. It was so crowded, they had to move it outside because they thought the courthouse would collapse. Now from that, I have got a whole PowerPoint on this, about 100 pictures. I collect these pictures, but these are some of the best ones. Path of righteousness. There is a fundamentalist, okay? You know he is because there's a sign. Down with education, to hell with truth, and he's dragging his son, the younger generation, through this mud of superstition. And he says, Papa, must we wait around in this mud all of our lives? Obviously demeaning us, okay? And I should mention what a fundamentalist is. A fundamentalist, that word came from a book written about 1904, I believe, and it was about concerns that we have in churches. And so many churches, for example, wrong to drink coffee. No one should drink coffee. If you drink coffee, you should be kicked out of the church. And so many of these things, they got together, a group of theologians, and said, now wait a minute, is drinking coffee a salvation issue? Is that really important? What's important? So they got together and they tried to determine what is really important. What are the fundamentals of Christianity? That's where the word fundamentalist came from. And so many things they ruled, yeah, they're a good idea, but they're not important. Dancing was important. Bathing was important, swimming, when men and women swim together. Some churches don't approve of that. They feel that men and women should swim in different pools, I guess. And so therefore, these were concerns. So the fundamentalists basically said, this is what is central to the faith. This is what's really important. And there wasn't that many things that were important. And then they gave scriptures to justify how important they were. So that word fundamentalist now, it means something totally different. It means someone who's very intolerant. Someone who just is rigid and like a fundamentalist Muslim. And that word is used a lot related to the Muslims and others. Okay, our children, tree of knowledge, and there is fundamentalist, and he says, no, you shall not take from the tree of knowledge. Here we go. Intelligent design, of course, is the people who believe that we are intelligently designed. Some are creationists, some are not. They just see evidence of intelligence in the design of our body. And there's a brain of a smart guy, another smart guy, and that's the brain of an intelligent designist, person who accepts creation, in essence, there you go. And here, science, you may be aware that the Pope basically said, you can accept the idea that humans evolved. Whether humans evolved or were created, it doesn't matter. It's up to you. It's not an important issue. And so they show Pope Francis showing science smashing creationism and intelligent design, and there you can see how guy is smashed as a result of the knowledge of science. And the most ironic thing is that, as I'll show you, all of the science that was part of the Scopes trial, all of it has been unequivocally, totally rejected. So who turned out to be right? Not the evolutionists. They turned out to be, from science themselves, they turned out to be incorrect, wrong. And who turned out to be correct? We did. And this is rarely talked about, but if you study the trial, it's true. There's evolution, all the facts, all the science, supports evolution. There's creationism, no facts, some faith floating above, and a pastor who pushes down to make it appear they're equal, but they're not. Here's an example. Okay, so is science being taught in our schools? This again is mocking us. Should children be exposed to facts? Are reason and empirical evidence suitable school subjects? Saying basically, we are pushing false ideas. We are anti-science. Now, when you look at the number of people who accept creation, we can see Iceland, this light color, the blue, is those who accept human evolution. And this is not sure and then false. So it would be about, 8%, 7% of people in Iceland do not accept human evolution. Denmark, not much different. Sweden, all the way over here. And the greatest number who accept creation and reject evolution is in Turkey, ironically. And that doesn't surprise me because many of my books are written in the Arabic language and published in Turkey. So I guess part of that number comes from reading my books in Arabic, which of course I can't read. I can't read a single letter, let alone word in Arabic. I'm lost as how they do it. I have a good friend who is fluent in Arabic, and he says it was pretty well written. It's a translation of my book. Okay. Next to it is United States of America. So we can see of all these countries, now there are other countries they didn't include, but of all these countries, the USA is, except Turkey, is highest in the number of people who accept the creation worldview. There's a lot of people in America. It used to be 70% were creationists. Now it's under 50%. Why is that changing? That's changing because the indoctrination in schools is pretty great. My guess is a lot of you were never exposed to evolution in school. But your grandkids, probably most of them, are exposed to evolution from first grade on up. Right? And so that is the problem. The indoctrination is why so many people in America now accept the evolution worldview. Now, when we look at Nobel Prizes, when you look at these dots, you can see that of those who win Nobel Prizes, the most prestigious honor in science is the Nobel Prize, unequivocally. And the country with the greatest number is the United States. Ironic in that we have such a high percent of creationists, and yet we have the highest in the world number of Nobel Prizes. So when you look at creationists are ignorant, they're stupid, anti-science, why is there so many people in America who, of course, we have a high percent comparatively of people who accept creation, so why are there so many who win Nobel Prizes? Obviously a contradiction of their belief. Who's number 2? United Kingdom. Number 3, Germany. Number 4, France. But even France, there's only a small number We go down here, China, there's what, 2, 3? 3 people in China have won Nobel Prizes. Japan, how many? 5, I guess, 6? Russia, how many? Not very many at all. And so we see that from this data, there's no evidence that evolution, rejection, dumbs down people. It's not there. And this is an example of the cartoons. This is not a science book. Well, obviously the Bible is not a science book. But where it speaks of, quote, science, we have found it is true. And of course the best example is, this is a classic example which I like to talk about, and that is not that long ago in the United States and in many countries, it was really sincerely believed that certain races were superior, Caucasians, and certain races were inferior, the blacks. This was widely believed not only in the United States, but of course in Nazi Germany. And therefore, this was, quote, science. And I have PowerPoints on this, I have books on this, that science for half a century taught the evolutionary inferiority of certain races. Who now has the honor of being found correct? We do. We believe that all individuals are descendants of Adam and Eve, therefore we're all brothers and sisters, therefore there is no race that is superior. There's some people that are superior, but that's a whole other story. But there is no race of people that are superior compared to other people. Now that's science. That is now widely accepted. That is believed by, I would say, 99.9% of all scientists. So who was right, the evolutionists or the creationists that believed we're all descendants of Adam and Eve and therefore we're all equal? So we win. We win again, unequivocally. So yeah, the Bible is not a science book, but it teaches we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, therefore we're all the same family. Okay, Mencken, he was a very popular writer, and he had a lot of interesting things to say, like he, talking about William Jennings Bryan, leads a new crusade when somehow pities him despite his imbecilities, but let no one laughing at him underestimate he can shake and inflame ignoramuses as no other man. So William Jennings Bryan, well, it's not a very flattering picture of him. And this is an example of many books, and I have over 100, and this is one. And basically, the battle over science and religion. And that is how virtually all books present this case as the battle between science and religion. Same thing in this book, Science versus Fundamentalism in America. And I don't know of any exceptions. It's science versus religion, and of course in the Scopes trial they had all the science right. They imply we're wrong. The science has been proven correct, and the Scopes trial was the first example of that. Science versus religion, here they're not even hiding the difference. One book of all the books published, the only book ever published which does not make that claim. The other side of the Scopes monkey trial, at its heart the trial was about racism, and that's well established if you look at the books involved in this case. And ironically, why did other people cover it? Now, I'm not saying all the books do not at least mention this. Some may have a half a page. Some may have a chapter. Few do, but some do. So therefore, it's not really hidden. All you have to do is look at the documents, and it's very obvious that racism was at the core of the whole Scopes trial. But mine's the only book ever published. Most of my books, people just ignore them with my evolution friends. But this book, somebody, an evolutionist, sat down and scrutinized every word. And guess what? He found a couple of words, I think 5 or 6, might have been 7, in a sentence, not the whole sentence, a few words in a few sentences that were the same in my book as is found in other books. And he wrote to the publisher and said, you ought to withdraw this book because Bergman plagiarized these few words. Well, if you take any book, my book, any other book, take half of a sentence, put it in Google Books, you know what you're going to find? In most cases, somebody else said the exact same thing. When you have 100 books on the Scopes trial, you're going to have some of the sentences about that trial the same. And that's what they found, which is, I guess I'm flattered that they couldn't even touch the theme. If I was wrong, they should have gotten into that. But no, they have to find a few words, I think it was, might have been seven words, as part of a sentence, not the whole sentence, but 7 words that are like another book, and therefore they try to lambast the book on that basis. And to me, it's a compliment that they could not find anything wrong with my conclusions. I mean, if I was wrong about something, boy, they would have jumped on it right away. But I guess they couldn't find that, so they just jumped on a few words. Okay, moving on. Brian expressed a lot of concerns about the Negro population. This is in 1902. He wrote a number of articles about the Negro population, that's the word he used, and he said basically that they have the same rights we all do. Same educational rights, same civil rights, all the rights that you and I have, the Negroes have every one of those rights. There is no difference. And he had pages stressing this, that they should be treated just like us. Okay, this is 1902. That was not reality in America until about a half a century later. It took 50 years for us legally to catch up with what Williams Jennings Bryan said. Why was he so concerned about this issue? Because he believed that we are all descendants of Adam and Eve, and therefore we are all brothers and sisters. He was going by Genesis. And so in the Scopes trial, that's what he argued. He argued basically in favor of Genesis. Why didn't he spend more time on showing that he believed that Negroes should be treated equally well as whites? Again, that trial occurred in the Deep South, and he probably knew if he would have pushed that part, he probably would have been ran out of town. We're talking about the Deep South. We're not talking about Minneapolis or Wisconsin. We're talking about Tennessee. And as far as I could find out, there was one black family in that whole community. And I understand he wasn't treated too well. So he wisely focused on the scripture. But of course, that's what the other side condemned him for, was focusing on the scripture. Okay, moving on. Many pictures that show this, from fish to man. There we go, we evolved. And guess who is our less evolved evolutionary ancestor? There he is. Obviously, and this is the cover of the book, obviously a Negro. This is from a 1925 book, Java Man, Piltdown, Neanderthal Man, and Cro-Magnon. These are all our evolutionary relatives, widely shown in many textbooks. And there are many, many examples, but I don't want to bore you. This example does the trick. One more, this is a textbook, and you can see the same sequence, except this would be, okay, this is also a Cro-Magnon man. And what is the evidence that these were based on? That's the evidence for Java Man. There's another name they used for him, which I'll mention in a minute. Evidence was a skull cap. That's it. So how do you get from the skull cap, how do you get all that detail? Well, they believe in evolution. This must be a skull cap from a missing link. Therefore, he must have looked kind of like that. So that's called artistic license. Oh, they did find one femur, but the femur is recognized as a human, and there are 3 different views of the same femur. So that's not the concern. And I have to wonder, you found a skull cap and a femur together? Does that mean our evolutionary ancestors were living with the modern humans? And of course, others recognize these problems as well. And this is a quote from a book. Only upper cranium and femur were found. How could his skin color, hair distribution, and so on be known? Well, it can't. Dubois, he was the guy who discovered this, claims that the remains are that later on are that of a gibbon. Okay? When we look at these charts, and there are lots of these charts, we can see the Negroes, number 9, and there's the Negro. So you can see the evolutionary tree is such where it does not picture the Negro, quote, as us. Okay, and he claimed the fossil was a missing link, Dubois did, between apes and humans, and he gave the species a scientific name, which was Pithecanthropus erectus, which are the names still used today. That means southern ape man. Okay, conclusion, and this is from a leading anthropologist, 2000 copyright, Sanjava Man, and he said, concluded, the fossil aroused much controversy. Within a decade of the discovery, almost 80 books and articles were published on Dubois' finds. Despite Dubois' argument, few accepted that Java man was a transitional form between apes and humans. So, this was used at the Scopes trial as evidence of human evolution, and what do scientists themselves say today? It's not evidence. And that's the book that I got this quote from. That's the leading book about Java man. Piltdown, the next famous example, and there he is, that's the skull, and that's what they think he looked like. And there's a leading scientist looking at the evidence, very scholarly, studious people showing the evidence, and that was also called the Fossil Man of Sussex. That's where it was found. It was found in Piltdown, which is part of Sussex, England. And there he is. Now, unraveling Piltdown. It says here, the science fraud of the century and its evolution. So now they recognize today that, indeed, Piltdown was a fraud. So the second evidence now used at the Scopes trial, now proven wrong. And there we can see the concern is who done it. And Neanderthal man is the next one they used. That's a painting of Neanderthal man. And that's a drawing of what they think he looked like. And there we can see Neanderthal man. There's Neanderthal man again, and there's Neanderthal man. Now, what have we concluded about Neanderthal man? Well, this is a cartoon, well, picture, I guess, in Great Britain, all dressed up, there he is, and no place to evolve. And this is a display of Neanderthal Museum in Germany, and basically he looks like you and I. Now, what they did here was, we have a lot of bones, and they put together from the bones what the face would look like. And how that's done today is, they have people that's all they do is put faces on bones. And a good example is a skull of a woman was discovered in Nebraska a few years ago, and all they had was a few bones and the skull. They had no idea who she was. They think she died about 5 years ago, judging by the area around the skull. But how do you find out whether she was murdered? They're pretty sure she was murdered. How do you find out who did it? You got to have a face. So they had one of these experts put a face on, and they know how to do this. They put on the clay and put eyeballs in the eye sockets and so on. They put the face on, finished it up, and they put that face on television and said, "Do you know this woman?" Well, believe it or not, a woman who lived next door to that woman said, "Yes, she was my neighbor. She moved away about 5 years ago. And her husband stayed here in the house with the kids." And so they brought him, the husband, to court, and he was convicted of first-degree murder based on the reconstruction of the skull. And so you can see how accurate they were. So accurate that she said, "Yeah, that was my neighbor. She was from Cambodia, actually. That's my neighbor. There she is." And so they were able to prove that he indeed did kill her. She wanted to go back to Cambodia, and he didn't want her to go, and so he killed her, I guess. She wanted to take the kids back with her, and he didn't want the kids to go, so kind of a bad solution, but so that's what he did. And this is they took a skull from Neanderthal, they put the flesh on it, and that's what she would look like. And if she'd comb her hair and have a nice dress on, she'd look much more modern, but they had to make her look a little bit like a missing link, and so that's why they gave these parts. But there's the eyeballs, those are glass, they put them in there, and they built the face around her, and that's what they look like. So we know now what Neanderthals look like. They look just like us. And this is a cover, the National Geographic. The other humans, Neanderthals revealed. And they basically, as they said, they are simply the other humans. They're just simply another people group. So Neanderthals out of the game. So far we looked at 3 different examples used in the Scopes trial, and guess what? All of them have been today refuted. So far we're right. Well, Homo rhodesiensis is another one, and again, same thing happened. Rhodesian man, now we know now a representative of the Neanderthal race or group. And we can see this: Neanderthal man, Cro-Magnon man, modern man, and again, all of these 3 were used in the Scopes trial as evidence. How about Cro-Magnon? I haven't talked about that much. There's a whole book about it, Cro-Magnon man, and you can see what he looked like. He looked like an ape. And now, this is Cro-Magnon man. This is from a 1999 magazine, and they say, it could be you. Cro-Magnon skulls look just like our own. So, down the drain, Cro-Magnon man. So it looks like we're almost out of evidence, and these are pictures of our evolutionary ancestors. And Australopithecus afarensis, they go forward, and then modern man. The problem you notice right away, this is from National Geographic, the problem you notice is the heads all look like apes, except the modern man. The bodies look like very modern men. And because of this picture, I have no small number of men that come up and say, boy, I sure wish I looked like that. Good looking guy. Well, the body is, the face is not, but why don't they show more ape-like bodies? Because they have almost no evidence for the body. Most of the evidence they have is the skull. And that's because the skulls, well, the rest of the bones were carried away by scavengers, and the skulls were less likely to be carried away. But many were broken and the brains taken out, so then they used the parts to reconstruct what they looked like. And there is Hesperopithecus. That was also commonly used, and there he is. That's Hesperopithecus. And the basis of this drawing was a single tooth, and this was rejected in 1927. Scopes trial was 1925. So not long after the Scopes trial, this was shown to be false. And there's a book, The Earth Speaks to Brian, by Henry Fairfield Osborne. He was one of Brian's chief opposers, and he used the scripture, The Earth Speaks to Brian, to defend his worldview, and he used Hesperopithecus. There's the tooth, different drawings. There's an article in Science, one of the leading science magazines in this area, and it was the first theropod primate found in America, and they talk about in detail what they found. Now, actually, these were not used in the trial because the judge would not let them testify to this because that wasn't part of the case. The case was only, did Scopes teach evolution, not whether or not evolution was true. But he did let them write up a paper, and then they put the paper in the court transcript, is what happened. But that was an advantage for the evolutionists because they could sit down and work on accurately presenting what they thought was the case. And Brian wanted to cross-examine them, but he couldn't do that because they weren't on the stand. This is a book that I did, Apes as Ancestors, and what I am showing this book is that all the claims, without exception, that are supposed to have supported the missing link between apes and us, all of them have been shown to be false. And it's a thick book, lots of information, and it is one of my poorest sellers. The reason being that when you look it up, open the book up, you'll notice page of references, another page, another page, another page, another page, small print. People look at it and they say, oh, look at all these paleontological journals. I can't read all this. But on the other hand, I do show all of the claims for our evolutionary ancestors are false. How do you do that? Well, I have my theory of the evolution of man, and he has his theory. So I defend my theory. I say his theory is all wet. Let me show you what's wrong with his theory. This is wrong, that's wrong. I give a long paper showing his theory is wrong. Okay. He, in turn, reads all about my theory, and he says, Bergman, your theory, this is wrong, that's wrong, you got a problem here, problem with this fossil, your theory is wrong as well. So they condemn or criticize each other, and all I have to do is read the literature about his theory, read the literature about somebody else's theory, and therefore, from the paleontological literature, I can conclude they're all wrong. Now, why would they believe this? Because they believe in evolution. Evolution is true, so one of them has to be right. When you look at the world through evolution glasses, you see this has got to be right. And this is why you can get a skull cap and get the whole face, because it's got to be right. They can't countenance the idea that evolution is not true. Human evolution is not true. They just can't accept that because the alternative is what? We were created. And they know that. And so therefore, they try to get around that. Anyways, my book on vestigial organs, that is something else they brought up. At that 1925, there were about 100 organs that were seen as vestigial. They had no function. The appendix, the tonsils, the os coccyx, and pituitary gland, the pineal gland, thyroid gland. Lots of these structures were seen as vestigial, as useless. Useless organs, the rise and fall of a central claim of evolution. Now, from the literature, we know that all of these claims of useless organs are wrong. And I taught anatomy, physiology for about 20 years, and none of the books we used even had the word vestigial in it. All of the organs they claim were vestigial are in that book, the book I used, as well as other books that I referred to. All of them were shown to have functions. Tonsils has 3 functions. The appendix has 4 functions. The os coccyx has 3 functions. So they all have important uses. So there are no examples today of vestigial organs. So what do we see, to summarize? We see that the evolution claims were all wrong, proven by evolutionists themselves that they were wrong. The creation, our claims, the Christian claims, have all been vindicated. Now, why don't the books say that? Well, that doesn't help their case much. And if they would say it, probably they would have a hard time getting it published. Now, some journal articles do mention this. Okay, it's not really hidden, but it's not commonly talked about, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to convince you of evolution. And therefore, if you have information against evolution, to them, well, it's a problem. We'll figure it out. Yeah, you've noticed something that we need to work on. But they believe, they're true believers in the evolution worldview, and therefore they just cannot accept the possibility that it is not true. Okay, moving on. And useless organs, that would be vestigial organs, poor design. Another claim against our worldview is that you have body parts that are poor design. For example, you can choke on food. So they suggest that what you should have is not only a mouth for food, but you should have another system, a separate system for breathing, for example. There shouldn't be one tube, there should be 3 different systems in order to bring food and oxygen, etc., into the body, which of course is ludicrous. That's not going to work. Genesis 1:27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female, he created them. Acts 17:26, for from one man, Adam, he made every man and woman and every race of humanity, and he spread us over all the earth. So that's been proven to be correct. The Bible's been proven to be correct. Now, let's go back to Bryan in his book, Commoner. These are some of the things he wrote. 1902, he said, "The legal rights of the black man, there can be no question. The Negro is a citizen, and as a citizen is entitled to all of the guarantees of the federal and state constitutions." That was not accepted in 1902. That was only accepted finally in about 1963 or 1962 with Supreme Court rulings. He added, he has freedom to speak and write, freedom of conscience, and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those who pushed Jim Crow laws wanted to prevent the integration of people judged in inferior racial stock. The Negro must, Bryan said, be educated. The whites, for their own as well as the good of the Negroes, must ensure that public schools are open to every child, white and black. This was not effectively enforced until what, about 1970 something? So you can see how well ahead he was. You can also see that that was his concern. And again, why did he believe that? Because the scriptures I just read. They're people like we are. They're not an inferior race. Civic biology, that's the book Scopes used. And eugenics was one of the primary reasons that Bryan was concerned about the teaching of evolution. And I'll just give you a few examples. There's a whole chapter on this. One example, page 261. The stock of domesticated animals can be improved, if they can be improved. The health and vigor of the future generations of men and women on the earth might also be improved by applying to them the laws of selection. So we should breed people just like animals. And that's called eugenics. And that was what that chapter pushed. Very, I have to say, convincingly. They gave a lot of examples. And then eugenics means well-born. And then he jumps to the Calikics and Jukes. And I'll show you the picture of that. This was a very famous story. And this was about a sailor who dallied with a barroom girl, I guess. There she was. And then they had all these kids. And these kids got married and had more kids. And we ended up with a race of robbers, stealers, drunks, etc. Hundreds of the lowest type of human beings came from this one relationship this sailor had with this young girl. But the sailor learned his lesson, I guess now, very early. I'm not sure if he married this girl, but he learned his lesson and he met this nice Quaker girl. There she is. And with that Quaker girl, he had, I guess, 6, 7 kids. And then from those kids, we ended up with doctors and lawyers and ministers and well-respected people in the community. So the story is very clearly bad people produce offspring of a bunch of losers. Good people produce offspring of very good people. That illustration was used in German textbooks during World War II, and that was a major evidence that Hitler used to prevent pollution of the superior German race with all these other inferior races like the Jews, the Gypsies, etc. And so these illustrations from this book were widely used and justified in Germany as a means of producing a superior race. And Hitler made it very clear what his goal was. Toward the end of the war, when they needed more supplies to help the troops in Russia, they were given a choice. Bus the Jews to the camps to kill them, or bus supplies to Russia to feed the troops. They made it very clear it was more important to kill the Jews than it was to win the war. The war was not mainly about property. The war was mainly about killing the Jews. Why did Hitler stop bombing Germany? Probably several reasons, but one major reason was how many Jews lived in Great Britain. So why did Nazis stop bombing Great Britain? Well, one reason was there wasn't many Jews there. What do you waste your time for when Hitler thought over and over that Britain, because they're all the superior, part of the superior race as well, so they would work with us wasn't concerned about. He just wanted, of course, to take over Great Britain, but he wasn't concerned about the racial issue. But there were millions of Jews in Russia, so guess where he was? He was in Russia so he could kill all those Jews. And that's exactly what happened if you study World War II. So which was more important, winning the war or killing the Jews? Clearly, that's the only war that I'm aware of that totally, the whole concern was to eliminate an inferior race that dominated the war. And of course, when we American troops went into Germany and realized what was going on, a question they had is, you've got all these Jews killed in concentration camps. Why don't you draft them? Why don't you just give them? And they were drafted, by the way, in World War I, and Jews fought valiantly for Germany in World War I. Just draft them all. When you're fighting a war, what are you killing 6 million of your own people for? That doesn't make sense. Well, it does when you see the central view that Hitler had. We've got to prevent the pollution of the superior race. That means we've got to get rid of the Jews and the Slavics. Slavics, the Ukrainians, the Russians, the Poles as well, must be eliminated. And this is an interesting story. This is actually, this story is based on some truth, not much, but some truth. And that girl there was in an institution for mentally deficient people. And they say over and over that she couldn't read, she was illiterate. And I thought that was interesting because the most famous picture of her, she's reading a book. She loved to read. And she was, they're trying to figure out how they ruled her as an imbecile. Probably she was uneducated. She was from a poor family. And although she could read, she taught herself. But on the other hand, she probably wasn't the brightest kid in the classroom. But she was really talented. She was a carpenter. She built things out of wood. She was very, very talented. One tragic story is that they had a custodian at the institution where she worked at, and the custodian fell in love with her. And they were going places together. They got along quite well. And the head found out about this and basically fired the custodian. And she had a picture of the custodian, and this headmaster took the picture, tore it up in many pieces, and said, "You're going to have to forget about him. You can't have any children because they would be inferior." Now, probably the custodian was not much more intelligent than she was. They probably were pretty well matched intellectually. But it so happened he had a job as a custodian, and she was a patient in the mental hospital for imbeciles, for derelicts or whatever they call it. But she looked to be like 90, and she spent her whole life in the institution. Very tragic story. Okay, the book Scopes used a few quotes. The race of man, at the present time, there exist upon the earth 5 races or varieties of man, each very different from the other. These are the Ethiopian or Negro type, that's the lowest, the race in Africa, Mongolian or yellow race, and finally the highest type of all, the Caucasians, represented by the civilized white inhabitants of Europe and America. Page 251. You can't get any clearer than that. And that's what Brian was clearly concerned about, openly concerned about. Improving a man, if you can improve the stock of animals by breeding, why not apply the same laws to people? Why not breed people to produce a superior stock? And eugenics, he went on and he talked about we have diseases, etc. We need to allow people to marry only when they can prove they don't have epilepsy, feeble-mindedness, or handicaps. And they said these people should not breed. Therefore, what they did in America was to sterilize them. And Indiana had, I think, the second highest number of people sterilized. California was number 1. Indiana was number 2. I'm not sure where Illinois was on this level, but it was widely practiced, sterilization, based on this reasoning. Parasitism and its cost to society, they spread diseases, immorality, crime, all kinds of problems. And these people were parasites, and therefore they must be gotten rid of. And that's, of course, the ideas that Hitler had. When the Nuremberg trials were formulated and the Nazis were put on trial, their defense was, why are you blaming us? We got our ideas from you. We even used your laws. We used your books. We used your ideas. This is where we got the ideas from. Why are you blaming us? And the only answer we had was, we just sterilized them. You killed them. That was the difference. And they didn't see that was much of a difference. And they had a hard time really understanding about the Holocaust. What are you blaming us for? We were doing what the scientists said was right. And of course, this was almost a universal acceptance among science that eugenics is a good idea. Rarely did any scientist oppose it. It was taught, I think I mentioned it, it was taught in schools. I guess I don't mention that here. It was taught in schools, hundreds of schools taught eugenics. So, it's widely accepted. In fact, only those ignorant creationists subjected to that based on the Bible. And so, therefore, we turned out to be correct, and they turned out to be incorrect. So to summarize, the Scopes trial is one of the major events which set the stage for a whole slew of court decisions which basically said our worldview is religious and the scientist worldview is fact. And if you think about it, when you look at worldviews, the basic core is where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. Evolution says where we came from, we evolve, why we're here, to survive, where we're going, when we die, we die. That's a worldview. Christianity says, where do we come from? God created us. Why are we here? To serve God, to serve fellow man. Where are we going? When we die, we go to have an afterlife, heaven or hell. So they're both religions. They're both worldviews. So basically, the courts have ruled our religion can be taught, yours can't. And this is all based on the Scopes trial. And so that is, they say, well, the schools can't teach religion. Well, they sure are. They clearly teach religion. Religion is basically a worldview, and they teach the evolutionary worldview. Some pretty openly. Some state there's no purpose in life. None at all. Except what we want to do now. There's no eternal, there's no long-term purpose. The purpose is now, well, we're hungry. We got to feed ourselves. We got to have a family. We have to. So there's local purposes, but there's not any long-term purpose. Christianity, of course, teaches local purposes and long-term purposes. The Bible talks a lot about living forever, about eternal life, about storing up in heaven and not on the earth. And so the two are worldviews or religions, and the state has codified based on court decisions going all the way back to the Scopes trial. They basically codified the idea that, indeed, their view is science, our view is religion. And that's wrong. Our view is much science is their view. In fact, the science turned out to be right for us. And not only in this case, but lots of other cases. The science turned out to be right. So we have the science, and now we know, Scopes trial especially, now we know that they did not have the science, and we have been proven to be correct. And it'd be great if we could get a good court case and say, look, we're both teaching worldviews. Let's be honest. What do I think they should teach? What they should teach in the schools is very simple. Evolution was a theory that did a lot of harm, caused a lot of evil, and the evidence is clearly against evolution. So teach evolution, but show students that the evidence is overwhelming against evolution. Evolution, as you all know, is based on two things: origin of genetic information, i.e. mutations, and selection of superior individuals. So natural selection, that's obvious. We're okay with that, no problem, that's true. But Darwin had no idea, and evolutionists today have no explanation for the origin of genetic information. Their explanation is mutations. The problem is the vast majority of mutations are harmful. And we know this. I worked in a medical college for a number of years. I studied cancer. Cancer is caused by mutations. In fact, disease is caused by toxins, okay? Damage because of accidents, okay? Damage because of pathogens and mutations. Mutations is a major cause of disease. And beneficial mutations, they try to claim a few examples, but by and large, the vast majority of all mutations are harmful. And we know this. And we know why they're harmful. We know why mutations can never improve the species. We know that by, in my own case, by studying cancer. We know a lot about mutations because mutations cause cancer, period. End of story. That's not argumented. And we know why that mutations are harmful and why they cannot build new information. One reason is mutations occur in hotspots. So what do you have? You have the same mutation over and over and over and over. And you can't, to get evolution, you have to have variation in the genes. You don't get that with mutation. You get a lot of mutations in the same place. In cancer, we know that, and that's important because what we do is find out where your mutation is, like does it affect P53? So if it affects P53, where it is, that helps us specialize in treating your cancer. They just analyze the mutations, and they know a vast majority are going to be in hotspots. So you'll never, in a billion years, you will never get new information that's functional by mutations. Sometimes you destroy a gene, and that may be beneficial because the other genes take over. And they should admit that, but they say, well, we'll figure it out. And to me, it's amazing they don't accept the reality. You're a good audience, a great audience. I only wish there were more young people. I'm preaching to the choir. I bet there's nobody in here that disagrees with anything that I said. Right? Right. And what I need is a bunch of young teenagers, college students, and then I'll get a lot of comments because so many young people do not accept the creation worldview because they're indoctrinated into evolution. We have a creation group in Wheaton where I've been going for probably 30 years. And I've heard so many horror stories about Wheaton College and how aggressive they are against creationists. And I find it, how can you believe that you are the result of lots of mistakes? Almost every mistake I've made has been harmful. I wish maybe somebody could make a mistake in writing a check for me. Instead of saying 1,000, say 1 million. A great mistake, but nobody's ever done it. So mistakes are rarely, in life they can be beneficial, but they are rarely, in life they're rarely beneficial. If evolution was true, all your kids who haven't had families yet should spend some time in a hospital sitting on a CT, computerized tomography, turn the thing on, give me a massive dose of radiation, and I'll have a couple geniuses. No, you won't. They'll say, well, how many CTs have you had? We'll give you a lead shield to protect you against the radiation. We know radiation causes mutation. We know that. And we know they're almost always harmful. So how can they believe that you are the result of lots of mistakes called mutations? It's just, and yet, this is what, you're Missouri or Wisconsin Synod? This church? I think it's Wisconsin Synod. There are a few denominations that correctly convey this information. Most major denominations, the Methodists, the other Lutherans, the American Lutheran, the other Lutherans, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, all of them accept evolution as fact. It's amazing that they can accept a myth as fact. And I think it's tragic. My wife is Methodist, so I don't want to argue about religion, so I go to her church. And the Methodists, I've spoken in 2 Methodist churches in my whole life. I've done 400 churches. Almost all of them are Baptist or, guess what, Lutheran. So lots of Lutheran churches I've been in because the denomination acknowledges the fact that mutations do not produce good people. And they know that. And so you're lucky to be with Missouri or Wisconsin Synod. The American Lutheran Church, they are right up there accepting evolution. The explanation for the origin of man is evolution. And I find this incredible. So I have a bridge. Whoever wants to buy it, I'll give you a real good discount. It's in Brooklyn. I'll give it for only $10 million. Anybody who's somewhat knowledgeable would say, well, it's silly. And yet people accept something worse. Because maybe it is for sale. I don't know. It could be for sale. Maybe they want to build a new Brooklyn Bridge. But that's the joke people say about, I got a bridge I want to sell you. We have time for questions?